The lavender balloons drifted and danced gently in the breeze, their pastel hues glowing against the flawless expanse of the afternoon sky. As I made my way toward my best friend's baby shower, each step felt oddly heavy despite the festive setting. 20 years of friendship with Colette had taught me to read her like a well-worn novel. I knew the subtle twitch of her smile when she was keeping something hidden. I recognized the calculated angle of her head when she needed attention or sympathy. But today, something was off, deeply and unmistakably off. There was a strange current in the air, an underlying tension that unsettled me before I'd even reached her front door. Bennett, my husband, was beside me. A physician by profession, he had a keen eye for anomalies, details that most people would overlook. His gaze flicked across the yard and over the gathering crowd with the precision of someone assessing a patient. When he took my hand in his and leaned close enough for me to feel his breath on my cheek, his words sent a chill through me. "We need to leave, now." I should have listened. I should have taken that whisper for the warning it was. But like so many times before, I dismissed it. I brushed off his concern with practiced ease, rationalizing his unease the way I always did when it came to Colette. After all, this was my best friend, practically a sister. What could possibly be so wrong? It wasn't until we were halfway home, the pastel-hued decoration still visible in the rearview mirror, that he said the three words that unraveled the seams of my reality. Words that struck with such finality they pierced through years of memories and laughter. I didn't want to hear them, refused to believe them. I had no idea then just how tangled the web of lies had become, or what price I would pay for uncovering the truth about the person I thought I knew better than anyone. Earlier that day, we had pulled into the familiar circular driveway of Colette's suburban home, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires oddly loud in the quiet neighborhood. The house was adorned in soft lavender and delicate cream streamers that swayed gently in the spring breeze. Balloon clusters bobbed with every gust of wind, tethered to posts and railing like pastel sentinels. It was the kind of picturesque setting that made it into magazines, a curated dreamscape of domestic joy. Cars were parked along both sides of the street, far more than I had expected for what Colette had described over the phone as a small, intimate affair. "Looks like the whole town decided to show up," Bennett muttered, adjusting the collar of his shirt. His eyes didn't stop scanning the scene, every muscle in his jaw tight with unease. "You know how she is," I replied, trying to sound light. "Colette doesn't do subtle. Even her small gatherings tend to turn into events." He nodded slowly, but there was something guarded in his expression. This wasn't his usual social self, the charming conversationalist who knew every neighbor's dog by name and made friends with strangers at the grocery store. Today, his posture was rigid, watchful. "You okay?" I asked, placing a gentle hand on his forearm. "Yeah," he said after a pause, forcing a thin smile. "Just running on fumes from that double shift last night." I let it go. He often came home drained after back-to-back shifts at the hospital, and I didn't want to kick off Colette's big day with a disagreement. We made our way up the meticulously groomed path, and I struggled slightly under the weight of a gift basket I'd prepared with love. Tiny organic cotton onesies, picture books bound in cloth, and a blanket I had spent the last 3 months knitting, each stitch a testament to our decades-long bond. Before we could even knock, the door burst open. "Sarah," Colette exclaimed, wrapping her arms out to embrace me. She looked like she had stepped off the pages of a maternity catalog. Her flowing, blush-pink dress skimmed the floor, hair cascading in styled waves crowned with a garland of fresh flowers. Her makeup was expertly applied, accentuating her azure eyes and radiant cheeks. "You look incredible," I said, passing the basket to Bennett so I could hug her properly. She held me at arm's length, shifting her body slightly away. "Let's not squish the baby," she giggled, patting her rounded belly with a kind of performative flourish that didn't sit quite right with me. It was subtle, but the gesture felt more like a display than a motherly instinct. "We wouldn't want that," I murmured, stealing a glance at Bennett, who was now peering into the house like he was searching for something or someone. The entryway had been transformed into a vision of lavender and floral elegance. Every table, every corner was adorned with fragrant bouquets. A photographer weaved through the crowd, snapping candid shots like we were all models in some lavish editorial. In the back corner, a bartender worked behind a marble-top setup, expertly mixing sparkling mocktails and fruit-garnished mimosas. Above it all, a pink neon sign announced in cursive, "It's a girl." "This is wow," I breathed, taking in the extravagance. "Colette, this must have cost a fortune." She waved a hand airily. "Oh, don't worry. Most of it was donated. People have been unbelievably generous." I caught the flicker of Bennett's raised brow, but he said nothing. Just then, Alaric approached Colette's husband of 3 years, tall and lean with a receding hairline that made him appear older than he was. He handed Bennett a flute of champagne. "For the non-pregnant contingent," he quipped, his British accent crisp and polished. "Congratulations," Bennett said, clinking his glass. "First time's a big adjustment." Alaric chuckled, though his eyes darted sideways toward Colette. A silent exchange passed between them, quick but not invisible. From across the room, a familiar voice called my name. Opal burst through the crowd, her curly hair bouncing like springs. Close behind were Sierra and Gage, our old high school gang reunited. "It's been forever," Sierra beamed, pulling me into a tight hug. Her bohemian dress swayed around her willowy frame, paint stains faintly visible on her fingers despite an attempt to wash them clean. 6 months isn't forever, I laughed. "In Arda's time, it's an eternity," she grinned. Opal stood a little back, her gaze observant, analytical. The therapist in her never really turned off. "Still running the counseling center?" she asked. "Is busier than ever," I said. "It feels like the whole world needs therapy these days." Gage, once Colette's awkward younger brother, hovered at the edge. Gone was the lanky boy from high school. In his place was a man who looked at me a moment too long. "Good to see you again," he said softly. "You too," I replied, suddenly aware of Bennett's eyes on us. Colette clapped her hands. "Now that Sarah's here, I can show you the nursery mock-up. The designer just sent over the final renderings." She bounded up the stairs with practiced enthusiasm. I followed, with Bennett trailing close beside me. His hand brushed against mine. "Did you notice anything odd?" he whispered. "Like what?" I murmured back, not ready to confront what I already knew deep down. He gave a slight shake of his head. "Never mind," he murmured. "Later." The second bedroom had been transformed into something that belonged in a designer catalog. Soft shades of blush and cream coated every surface. Overhead, a delicate crystal chandelier sparkled, casting scattered light across the room like sunlight through dewdrops. The crib, clearly custom-made, boasted intricate carvings of vines and tiny birds along its edges. The craftsmanship unmistakably expensive. Murals adorned the walls, hand-painted scenes of a dreamlike forest, where gentle-eyed deer peeked through painted foliage and rabbits nestled in painted tufts of grass. A buttery soft armchair sat in the corner beside a miniature bookshelf, already overflowing with classic children's book titles, like Goodnight Moon and Where the Wild Things Are, stacked between artisanal wooden toys. "It's breathtaking," Sierra whispered, her voice reverent. "Absolutely," I replied, though unease began to stir in the pit of my stomach. Something didn't fit. This room was opulent, borderline decadent, and it clashed with what I knew of Colette and Alaric's usual sensibilities. They weren't extravagant people. Alaric worked in publishing, not at some high-powered firm, and Colette managed a small non-profit. Almost as if sensing my doubt, Colette turned toward us, her voice breezy. Most of it was gifted. Vendors supporting the maternal health initiative I run wanted to showcase their latest designs, she explained, eyes flitting briefly to the chandelier. "It's cross-promotion. Great for their portfolios." "How convenient," Opal remarked, her tone light but her raised eyebrow unmistakably skeptical. Years as a therapist had trained her to spot contradictions with uncanny precision. Colette's smile flickered, tightening at the corners like a bow pulled too taut. "It's networking," she said, regaining her cheer. "The best kind, everyone wins." As the others admired the hand-stitched wallpaper and artisan furniture, my gaze shifted to Bennett, who lingered in the doorway. He wasn't looking at the room with admiration. He was examining it. His phone was out, camera aimed, and he moved slowly, methodically, capturing close-up shots. Downstairs, the party had hit its stride. Laughter echoed from the living room. Guests were playing silly baby-themed games and filling out advice cards with quippy parental wisdom. The gift table groaned beneath towers of wrapped boxes, ribbons cascading over the edges. But through all the celebration, Bennett remained at a distance. He watched from corners, texted frequently, and did not engage with the ease that usually made him the life of any gathering. During a lull, I found him by the drinks table. He didn't even notice me approach until I cleared my throat. "What's going on with you today?" I asked, searching his face for answers. "Nothing," he said, his eyes flicking across the room again. "Just tired." "You keep saying that, but something's off. You're barely talking to anyone. You haven't even smiled." He exhaled and ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with something. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I've just noticed some things that don't add up." Before I could demand an explanation, the photographer's voice rang out, calling for a group photo. We gathered around Colette, who stood front and center with her hands lovingly cradling her stomach like it was filled with treasure. As the countdown began, Bennett edged backward, distracted. His gaze locked on something or someone across the room. His phone was in his hand again, thumbs tapping rapidly. I followed his line of sight to a man standing by the gifts. He was older, maybe in his mid-50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His expression as he watched Colette was impossible to pin down. Some strange blend of concern and bewilderment. "Who's that?" I whispered to Sierra, nodding in the man's direction. She shrugged. "Maybe one of Alaric's co-workers, or a family friend?" After the photos, Colette's mother took center stage. Patricia Whitman commanded attention the way only someone practiced in it could. Her platinum bob was perfectly sculpted, her sharp features accentuated by expertly applied makeup and, judging by the tightness of her smile, more than one cosmetic procedure. Raising a champagne glass, she began her speech. "When Colette first told me she was expecting," she said, voice quivering with feigned emotion, "I thought of all the silence we had endured, all the years of waiting. This little girl, she is a miracle." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, but beside me, Bennett went rigid. "We have to leave," he said suddenly, his voice low and urgent. "What, now?" I hissed. "We can't just leave in the middle of era." He turned to me, gripping my wrist not hard but firm enough that I knew he was deadly serious. His eyes locked with mine, full of something that wasn't panic, but had all the intensity of it. "Trust me," he whispered, "we need to go." I hesitated, torn between the sharp edge in his voice and my loyalty to Colette. "This is her baby shower, I can't just vanish." "I'll explain in the car," he interrupted, "please." It was the please that did it. There was no fear in his voice, only certainty, which in some ways was even more alarming. I made quick apologies to Colette, blaming an emergency call from the hospital. She pouted, clearly disappointed, but waved us off after extracting a vague promise for lunch soon. As we pulled away, the lavender balloon still visible in the rearview mirror, I turned to Bennett, arms folded. "This better be worth it." His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "It's not," he said grimly, "not in the way you're thinking." The silence in the car grew thick, almost solid. It sat between us like a shadowy third passenger. Outside, spring painted everything in cheerful hues, dogwoods in bloom, sunlight filtering through young leaves, but the mood in our car was anything but light. "Are you going to tell me what the hell that was about?" I finally asked. "Or should I just start guessing?" Bennett's jaw clenched. "Give me a minute," he said. "I'm still working out how to say it." "Say what? That you humiliated me in front of everyone I care about? That you dragged me out like we were running from a crime scene?" He didn't answer, just flicked on the blinker and merged onto the highway with more force than necessary. "Be Bennett," I said again, this time more gently. "Whatever this is, just tell me." He let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. "Not until we're further out. I need you focused, not distracted." "You're scaring me." "I know, I'm sorry." He reached across the console and squeezed my hand, his touch warm but firm. We drove in tense silence for another 15 minutes, the cookie-cutter suburbs giving way to open countryside. A rusted billboard loomed ahead, advertising a diner that had been closed for years. At last he spoke. "Colette's not pregnant." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. None came. "That's ridiculous," I said, trying to laugh. "We were just at her baby shower. I saw her belly." "You saw something," he replied, voice now clinical, detached. "But it wasn't a 7-month pregnancy." "That's absurd." I twisted in my seat to face him. "I've known Colette since we were 6 years old. I would know if she were faking something like this." "Would you?" he asked quietly, eyes flicking toward me, then back to the road. "When was the last time you actually touched her belly?" Bennett's question sliced through the quiet like a razor, sharp and unexpected. I opened my mouth, ready to respond instinctively, but no words came. My mind flicked back through every memory I had of Colette over the past 7 months. The announcement dinner where she'd toasted with sparkling cider, the gender reveal party with its elaborate pink confetti explosion, the shopping trips for maternity clothes where we giggled over baby onesies and nursing bra. There had been embraces, yes, but they were always angled, always brief, hugs that seemed orchestrated rather than natural. "She doesn't like people touching her stomach," I said defensively, arms folded. "Lots of pregnant women don't." Bennett's gaze didn't waver. "That's convenient." "Stop it." My voice cracked like a whip. "This is ridiculous. You can't honestly believe she's faking it. What could she possibly gain?" He sighed deeply, leaning back into the driver's seat as if gathering strength. The man by the gift table at the shower, the one watching Colette, that was Dr. Nathaniel Harmon. He's an obstetrician at my hospital. "So, maybe he's her doctor," I countered. He's not, Bennett replied quietly. He only works out of Mercy General. Colette's been going to St. Elizabeth's. You told me that yourself back in January. I frowned. Maybe she switched doctors? Sarah, he said gently, his voice threading with compassion. He recognized me. We made eye contact. And he looked concerned. Really concerned. That wasn't casual observation. It was like he was seeing something he didn't know how to make sense of. My heart skipped. You're reading too much into it. I wish I were, but after that I overheard Alara talking in the hallway near the guest bathroom. My stomach nodded. What did he say? Bennett's hands tightened on the steering wheel again. She's starting to believe it herself. We need to speed this up. That's what he said, word for word. The air in the car turned heavy. The implication was so outrageous, so bizarre that my mind recoiled from it. That could have meant anything, I said, my voice brittle. Then explain the lab reports I saw in their home office last weekend, Bennett continued. We were helping them move the desk. The papers were out, blood work panels, Sarah. I glanced at them. They didn't match pregnancy profiles. You were snooping, I asked, aghast. They were lying open. I wasn't rifling through drawers. And I'm a doctor. I know what I saw. Anger sparked inside me, hot and blinding. So what, you think this is all some elaborate performance? That my best friend is walking around with a fake belly and staging a fake pregnancy? Do you hear yourself? I do. And yes, it sounds absurd. More than absurd. Possibly delusional. But I can't ignore what I've observed. This is jealousy, I spat, turning on him fully now. You've always had a problem with how close Colette and I are. His face darkened. That's not fair. Isn't it? Ever since we got married, you've made snide comments about how much time I spend with her, about how often she calls, about how she always needs something from me. Because she manipulates you, he snapped. She's been doing it for years. She's my best friend. She uses you, Sarah, he said, his voice rising. She always has. Pull over, I said coldly. What? I said pull over. Bennett eased the car onto the shoulder, parking beneath a stretch of oak trees. The engine idled and the soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound between us. We sat in silence, not looking at each other. I don't want to fight, he said finally, but I needed to say something. I'm worried, not just for you, maybe even for her. If she's truly convinced herself this is real, that's not healthy. I turned my face to the window, trying to hide the tears that had sprung to my eyes. You're wrong. I hope I am. He gave me a moment before he spoke again, voice low and measured. Think about it, really think. She announced in January. That was 7 months ago. Has her body changed? Besides the bump. Her face, her ankles, her hands? Pregnancy changes everything, not just the stomach. My mind drifted back to the shower. Colette's arms had been slender, her cheekbones defined, her feet tucked elegantly into strappy heels. No swelling, no weight gain beyond that perfectly round bump. Even her energy had seemed boundless. She's always been thin, I whispered, but my confidence had begun to waver. And what about symptoms? He asked gently. No morning sickness, no food aversions, no backaches? She's described this pregnancy as what? Magical? I couldn't deny that. Colette had bragged about how easy it was. No fatigue, no discomfort, just pure joy and anticipation. In the nursery, Bennett continued. Everything was still in packaging, nothing assembled. It looked staged, like a shroom. Stop. I pressed my hands over my ears, feeling like a child. Just stop. He fell silent, giving me space. I sat that way for a long minute, until I couldn't avoid the truth his words had stirred. I'd seen it too. The way Colette always angled her body in photos. How she never once excused herself for a bathroom break. The way she'd changed the subject whenever I'd asked about prenatal vitamins or ultrasounds. How she never complained, never offered details. It had all felt curated. Why? I finally whispered, letting my hands fall. Why would anyone do this? I don't know, he said. Maybe for attention, for donations. That shower wasn't cheap, and she said most of it was donated. What does that even mean? Images from the shower played in my mind like a montage. The catered spread, the luxury decorations, the monogrammed gift bags. Colette's nonprofit worked with maternal health charities. Could this somehow be tied to that? I need to know the truth, I said quietly. Bennett nodded, shifting the car back into drive. So do I. We merged back onto the road, silence stretching between us like fog. My thoughts churned, unraveling years of trust. I'd known Colette longer than anyone outside my family. We'd grown up together. First crushes, first heartbreaks, college dorm nights, the whispered fears before our weddings. She was the sister I never had. But deep down, I also knew there was a side of her that thrived under scrutiny. Her life had always been a story she told to others. Dramatic breakups, perfect triumphs. The proposal from Alaric had been a public spectacle, complete with drone footage and a violin quartet. Colette never just lived, she performed. "I keep thinking about what her mom said," Bennett murmured, breaking the quiet. A blessing after long silence. What silence? I blinked. Colette's never mentioned fertility struggles, not once. My phone buzzed. A text from Colette lit the screen. "Miss you already? Lunch Tuesday? Just us girls. So much to tell you." I stared at it, reading it differently now. So much to tell you. What hadn't she already shared? What was left to say? The rest of the drive passed in pensive quiet. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the sky was painted in streaks of peach and gold, the last rays of sun slipping behind the trees. "What now?" I asked as Bennett cut the engine. He turned to face me, his expression solemn in the dim light. "That's up to you." "She's your best friend," Bennett had said, his voice soft with understanding. I nodded, the weight of the moment settling deep in my chest. "I have to know the truth." "Whatever it is," he said, "we'll face it together." That night, long after Bennett's breathing had evened out into the quiet rhythm of sleep, I lay awake, my mind racing. I stared at the ceiling, each shadow cast by the moonlight stirring memories I couldn't quite pin down. I thought back over every interaction I'd had with Colette during the last 7 months. Her excitement the night she called to share the news, the way she declined when I offered to go with her to doctor appointments, her vague answers about due dates, checkups, prenatal plans. Had it always been like that, or had I simply refused to see it? By the time morning light crept in through our bedroom windows, my thoughts had crystallized into something firm. I needed clarity, not speculation, not theories. I needed proof. The day after the baby shower dawned bright and crisp. Bennett had left early for his hospital shift, leaving the house still and quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, and replayed the conversation from the night before. The implications, the questions. Could Colette, the girl I'd loved like a sister since kindergarten, truly be orchestrating a lie so complex? With a deep breath, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the most recent photos of her on social media. She looked glowing, radiant in every shot, her hands always protectively resting on her belly. But the more I looked, the more I began to see details I had overlooked. She always wore flowing garments, empire waist dresses or oversized tunics. In every photo stood slightly to the side, never straight on, never allowing anyone to stand too close. It was subtle, but once noticed, impossible to ignore. Impulsively, I sent her a text. "Left my shawl at your place yesterday. Mind if I swing by to grab it?" The reply came almost instantly. "Oh sorry, not home, doctor appointment in the city. But Maradi's there. She can let you in." Perfect. Colette's younger sister Marad had always been less filtered, more transparent. Where Colette was polished and composed, Marad was open, sometimes awkward, always genuine. If there were any cracks in this story, she might be the one to reveal them. I tossed a shawl light blue, loosely knitted, into my bag, fabricating a forgotten item to justify my visit. The drive to Colette's house felt strangely long. I took each turn more slowly than usual, counting down to a confrontation I wasn't entirely sure I wanted. Their Victorian house, a wedding gift from Colette's affluent parents, sat near the edge of town, its porch framed by blooming wisteria and antique lanterns. It was picturesque, just like everything else in her life. I pulled into the driveway and noted that Alaric's sleek black car was missing. Only a dented silver Civic Marais was parked in the carport. I walked up the steps and knocked, my heart thudding against my ribcage like it was trying to break free. A few seconds later, the door swung open. "Sarah?" Marad blinked, clearly surprised. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she wore old sweatpants and one of Colette's faded college t-shirts. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, forcing cheerfulness. "Left my shawl yesterday. Colette said you could let me in to look for it." "Oh, right, sure, come in." She stepped aside. "It's probably with all the party stuff in the living room." I stepped inside, and immediately, the difference from the previous day was jarring. Without the floral arrangements, lights, and guests, the house felt oddly hollow. Cold, even. "Sorry about the mess," Marad said, waving at a cluttered coffee table strewn with magazines and a half-eaten plate of toast. "I wasn't expecting company." I scanned the room casually, pretending to search. "The shower was beautiful. You must have worked so hard on it." Marad shrugged. Mostly the event planner. Colette had a very specific vision. I wandered toward the dining room. A bottle of red wine sat open on the table, next to a plate with what looked like half a steak. "Late breakfast?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Alaric's," she said quickly, then caught herself. "I mean, from last night. He didn't finish it." "Steak and red wine?" I asked lightly. "Bit much for Colette these days, isn't it?" Murad's cheeks flushed. "Oh, she had something else, something pregnancy safe." I nodded slowly, filing away the slip. "Where is she today?" I asked. "She mentioned a doctor appointment?" "Yeah," Murad said, shifting from foot to foot. "She went to some clinic in the city, special monitoring or something." Her voice wobbled at the end. "Everything okay with the baby?" I pressed. "Totally, just routine," she said, a little too fast. I let the moment hang before changing the subject. "Mind if I check upstairs? Maybe I left the shawl in the nursery." "I'll come with you," she said quickly, too eagerly. The nursery looked exactly the same as it had the day before, picture perfect, untouched. But now, with Bennett's suspicions in mind, I saw more. The crib pieces were still in their boxes, plastic wrap intact. The mattress was upright in a corner, sealed. Every tiny outfit in the dresser still had its tags. "It's like a stage set," I murmured, brushing a hand along the pristine changing table. "Colette wants everything perfect before she opens anything," Mairead offered with a practiced smile. "You know how she is." "I thought I did," I said under my breath. As she turned to open the closet, something caught my eye behind the changing table, a small journal tucked in a corner as if it had slipped and been forgotten. When she wasn't looking, I quietly slipped it into my purse. "Here," Murad said brightly. "Maybe it's downstairs in the coat closet." We returned to the main level. I made a show of peeking behind couch cushions and coats. "I should head out," I said finally. "Probably left it in the car after all." "I'll tell Colette you stopped by," she said, walking me to the door. "Please do." I hesitated at the threshold. "Murad, is everything really okay with Colette? She's seemed different lately." A flicker of emotion passed across her face, something like fear. "She's just dealing with a lot," she said carefully. "But she'll be fine, she always is. If she ever needs anything, I hope she knows she can count on me." "I'll tell her," Murad said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. As I walked down the steps to my car, I heard voices, low, intense, from the side of the house. Something about the tone set off an instinct. I ducked behind the enormous hydrangea bush lining the driveway. Colette's voice drifted through the open kitchen window, sharp and clear, the composure stripped from it. "I don't care what he thinks. This will all be over once the donation clears." Colette's voice, sharp and clear through the open kitchen window, hit me like a slap. My blood turned to ice. "Donation? What donation?" I crouched lower behind the hydrangea bush, barely daring to breathe, straining to catch the rest of the conversation. But her tone dropped, becoming hushed, words blurred by distance and the rustle of leaves. I could make out only fragments, not backing out now, and too much invested. Then, footsteps, gravel crunching, someone approaching. I panicked and bolted, ducking around the side of the house and sprinting toward my car. I fumbled with the keys, heart thudding so hard it hurt. Just as I slid into the driver's seat, Colette rounded the corner, phone still pressed to her ear. Her eyes met mine. Her expression wasn't warm, wasn't friendly. It was unfamiliar, calculating, cold. The kind of look you give someone who's just seen too much. I didn't wait. I started the engine and drove away, not daring to look back until I was several blocks away. When I finally checked the rearview mirror, she was still there, standing motionless in her driveway, phone lowered now, her free hand limp at her side, not even pretending to cradle the bump she had so carefully flaunted for months. Once I was sure she wasn't following, I pulled over and called Bennett. My finger shook as I held the phone to my ear. "You might be right," I said the moment he answered. "Something's definitely off." "What happened?" His voice, usually calm and measured, was tight with concern. I went to the house. Colette wasn't supposed to be home, but she was. I overheard her talking to someone about a donation clearing. She said it would all be over after that. Then I found a journal. "Bennett, I think she's been lying, for a long time." He was quiet for a few seconds. "Did you see any medical paperwork, anything concrete?" But Murad was acting strange. There was red wine on the table, steak too, and the nursery, it's untouched, nothing's unboxed. "Keep the journal," he said firmly. "We might need it." "Need it for what?" I whispered, afraid of the answer. "What do you think this is?" His voice was grim. "Best case, some kind of delusional episode. Worst case, fraud." After we hung up, I sat in my car with the journal resting in my lap. It felt like a live wire, pulsing with energy and secrets. Opening it felt like a betrayal, but not opening it, that would be worse. That would be turning a blind eye. That would be enabling something I couldn't ignore anymore. I took a steadying breath and flipped to the first page. My dearest daughter, it began in Colette's neat, looping handwriting. Though you're not yet in my arms, you are already in my heart. Every day I wait is a day closer to holding you. They don't understand. They say it's not possible, that I need to accept reality. But mothers know. Mothers always know. Your room is ready. Your family is waiting. All we need now is you, with eternal love. The entry was dated 3 years ago. My breath caught. I flipped through more pages, each one a letter, each one written to this daughter that didn't exist. Some entries were filled with hope, others laced with grief and desperation. She wrote of nursery plans, of names she was considering, of dreams she'd had where the baby called her mama. It was a window into a mind slipping from reality. The most recent entry was dated just 2 weeks ago. My miracle girl. They've finally accepted your arrival. The donations are pouring in. Soon we'll have everything we need to bring you home properly. Just a little longer, and no one will be able to take you from me again. Forever yours, Mommy. I stared at the page, unable to move. What had happened 3 years ago? Colette and Alaric had only been married a few months then. Had she lost a pregnancy that no one knew about? Had it broken something inside her? My phone buzzed in my lap, jolting me. A text from Colette. Saw you driving away. Did you find your shawl? I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure what to type. Before I could respond, another message came in. Sarah, I need to talk to you. There's something I haven't told anyone. Can we meet tomorrow, somewhere private? I've been keeping this secret for too long. You're the only one I trust with the truth. I stared at the words, a storm of dread and vindication swirling inside me. Whatever was happening, it was coming to a head. With trembling fingers, I replied. Of course, name the time and place. Her answer came instantly. The cabin at Lake Morrison, noon, come alone. The cabin, her family's old summer place. Isolated, quiet, the perfect place for a confession or a confrontation. I started the engine again, the journal now tucked securely in my purse. The drive home blurred into nothingness as 20 years of friendship pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had made my decision. I would go, I would hear her out, and then I would decide what needed to happen next. Bennett was in the kitchen when I walked in, still in his scrubs, his eyes tired but alert. One look at my face and he knew. You found something, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded and sank into the chair at our kitchen table. A lot of somethings. He sat across from me as I pulled the journal from my bag and handed it to him. I watched his expression darken as he read, page by page. When he finished, he closed the cover carefully, as though it might explode. Whatever you're walking into tomorrow, he said quietly, be careful. If she's been living in this delusion for 3 years. She's still Colette, I said, but the words didn't ring true, not anymore. I didn't know who Colette was now. She might be, he agreed. But remember this, people who are drowning will pull down anyone who tries to save them. That night, after he went to bed, I recorded a voicemail I didn't have the courage to say aloud. I think you're right about everything. I'm scared. I'm scared of what I'll find out tomorrow. Sleep came fitfully. In my dreams, I stood in Colette's meticulously designed nursery. She rocked an empty blanket in her arms, humming lullabies into silence, her face lit with a mother's love for a child that wasn't there. Morning came too quickly. The drive to Lake Morrison took 40 minutes, though each mile felt longer than the last. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't even changed out of the clothes I'd worn the night before. The roads wound through countryside just beginning to bloom with late spring's promises. Wildflowers bobbed in the wind. The lake shimmered, calm and inviting. But my thoughts were anything but. I was heading into the unknown, not sure whether I was about to unearth a lie, confront a delusion, or both. The Whitman family cabin sat nestled in a grove of towering pine trees, its weathered timbers and moss-covered roof nearly camouflaged by decades of shade and silence. It looked just as I remembered, perhaps even more so, like a relic preserved in time. I hadn't been here in years, not since college, yet every detail tugged at something deep in my memory. As I drove up the gravel path, the familiar crunch under my tires filled the silence like a slow drumbeat. Colette's white SUV was already parked under the carport, partially shadowed by the leaning frame of the woodshed. My stomach tightened with dread. She was here. This was real. There would be no turning back now. I stepped out of the car, the air thick with the scent of sap and pine needles. I approached the cabin slowly, each step echoing louder in my ears than it should have. Details that once meant warmth and nostalgia now looked abandoned. The porch swing, where Colette and I had spent so many afternoons whispering secrets and braiding each other's hair, hung crooked, its rusted chains groaning faintly in the breeze. Empty terracotta flower pots sat neglected by the front steps, weeds sprouting from their dry soil. Even the welcome mat, once cheerfully embroidered with the word home, was so faded it was nearly unreadable. Before I could knock, the door creaked open. Colette stood in the threshold, framed by the dim interior. She wore a white sundress, simple and unadorned, and for the first time in months, she made no effort to simulate a pregnancy. Her stomach was flat, unmistakably so. No makeup masked the pale circles beneath her eyes, which were rimmed in red. She didn't look like the radiant mother-to-be from the baby shower. She looked raw. "You know," she said softly, not as a question but as a quiet acknowledgement. I nodded, throat too tight to speak. She stepped back, holding the door open, an invitation. "Come in." I crossed the threshold slowly, my senses heightened. The interior was dim and smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender, as though someone had tried to cover the scent of disuse. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that filtered through partially drawn blinds. The space was smaller than I remembered, or maybe my childhood memories had inflated its size. "I should have known," Colette said as she moved to the worn leather sofa and curled her legs underneath her, just like she always used to in college. "Bennett's a doctor, of course he noticed." I remained standing. I didn't know the rules of this conversation. There was no script for what came next. "Do you hate me?" she asked. Her voice was small, stripped of pretense. "No," I said honestly, though the emotion in my chest was far more complicated. "I don't hate you. I just don't understand." She laughed, a hollow sound that bounced off the cabin's wooden walls. "That makes two of us." She poured water from a pitcher on the coffee table into a glass, her hand steady. There was no wine today, no curated smile, no performance. "I wasn't always lying," she said, staring into her drink. "A year ago, I really was pregnant." My breath caught. "What?" 8 weeks, she said flatly. "We hadn't told anyone yet. We were waiting until the first trimester. Alaric was out of the country for work. I was alone when it happened. I miscarried on a Tuesday." My heart twisted. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because you'd just gotten your promotion at the counseling center," she replied, not unkindly. "Everyone was so proud of you. I didn't want to steal your moment." The guilt hit hard, familiar and sharp. That was always the undercurrent of our friendship. Colette's needs and mine constantly vying for air, like we were sharing the same emotional oxygen. "For the miscarriage," she continued, "I broke, quietly. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents, just Alaric and my doctor." I moved to sit beside her, careful to leave a respectful space between us. And then I stopped accepting it. I kept talking to her, to the baby. I started buying things, planning, pretending. Her fingers brushed her still flat abdomen, the gesture ghostly. "At first Alaric thought it was grief," she said, "and maybe it was, but it kept getting worse." "And did it become this?" I asked, gesturing vaguely at the surreal world we now occupied. She exhaled deeply. 3 months ago, I was supposed to speak at a fundraiser for my nonprofit, remember?" I nodded. I panic attacked backstage. Couldn't breathe, couldn't face them. Alaric found me curled up in the bathroom. I kept saying I couldn't tell everyone I'd failed, and he said, "What if you didn't have to?" My skin prickled. "You mean, he suggested you fake it?" "Exactly," she said. "He said I could say I was newly pregnant, just to get through the event. We'd say we lost it later, that it was private." Her eyes locked onto mine, hollow and searching. "But it felt so good, Sarah. The attention, the kindness, the way people treated me like I mattered again. I didn't want to let it go." "So it snowballed," I whispered. She nodded. "One event turned into another, one lie into a dozen, and then the donations started coming in." "Donations," I echoed. She stood suddenly and walked to a desk tucked in a corner. She pulled out a folder thick with papers and returned to the coffee table. "See for yourself." She spread the documents out, donation receipts, checks, letters of thanks, substantial amounts of money from individuals and foundations I recognized. "The foundation is real," she said. "We help women in underserved areas get prenatal care. That part is true. But people gave more when they thought I'd walk through the same fire." She handed me several documents. I scanned them. Graves Foundation, Hampton Healthcare, Williams Trust. These people, they all lost someone, I murmured. Children, grandchildren. She nodded. They donate because they know grief, and they believe I do too, because of the baby. I leaned back, stunned. So the shower, was that a fundraiser? Essentially, she said. Every decoration, every gift dominated by our sponsors. They get tax write-offs. We get supplies. It's manipulative, I said, and dishonest. She lowered her head. But is it criminal? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A message from Bennett. The obstetrician just emailed me. He's filed a fraud report. My stomach plummeted. Slowly, I turned the phone so Colette could see. She read the message, her face draining of color. Who else knows? I asked quietly. Just Alaric, she said hoarsely. And Murad. She figured it out last month. Her composure shattered. Sarah, I can't go to jail. If they shut us down, all those women, those mothers, we helped, they'll have nothing. You should have thought of that before any of this began, before the performance, the deception, the lies. I know, Colette's voice cracked. Tears slipped down her cheeks, carving silent tracks through the faint dust on her skin. I know it was wrong, but I swear I'll make it right. Once the final donation from Graves clears, it's for a mobile ultrasound machine. I'll go public with the loss. I stared at her, stunned. There'll be sympathy, she continued, as if trying to convince herself more than me. Not suspicion. No one will question it. They'll understand. People always forgive. Grief. But there was no grief in her voice. What I heard was planning, strategy. She wasn't unraveling. She was organizing. Coldness settled in my chest. This wasn't just denial. This wasn't delusion. This was control, manipulation. And what about everyone who loves you? I asked. What about the people who've celebrated with you, worried about you, spent money, time, energy preparing for a child that never existed? They'll recover, she said bluntly, swiping at her cheeks. People always do. I'm not sure I will, I admitted. My voice was barely a whisper. That changed something. A flicker crossed her face, raw, fleeting vulnerability. For a moment, I saw the girl I'd known for so many years, the one who'd once danced barefoot on this very porch, hair tangled from the lake, dreams spilling out of her like song lyrics. My oldest friend. I need you, Sarah, she said, her voice barely audible. You're the only person I trust not to leave me. You always understood me when no one else did. The weight of our shared history pressed down like a stone. 20 years of friendship, of sleepovers, college dorm confessions, weddings, heartaches, reunions. The good and the bad. All the time she had lifted me, I stood, gathering my purse. I'll think about it, I said carefully. But Colette, this has to stop, today. She nodded quickly, eyes wet. Anything you want, just don't tell anyone else, please. I didn't answer. As I walked out and down the steps, the cabin behind me shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt a deep hollowness spreading inside me. The woman I had just left behind wasn't the Colette I had once trusted with every piece of my life. She was someone else now, someone I didn't recognize. Halfway down the highway, my phone rang. Bennett's voice filled the car through the speakers before I could even say hello. You were right, I said, cutting him off, about everything. Are you okay? His voice was steady but laced with worry. No, I whispered, I'm really not. Come home, he said softly. We'll figure this out, together. I wanted to believe that, but something still nagged at me. A loose thread I couldn't let go. Colette had mentioned the Graves Foundation again. The final donation. The name tugged at something deeper in my memory, not just from the donor list at New Beginnings, but somewhere more personal. I took the next exit and pulled into the parking lot of a quiet coffee shop. Inside the car, I opened my phone's contact list and searched. There it was, Penelope Graves. I remembered her clearly, a stern but kind widow I had met at a charity gala the year before. She'd taken a special interest in my counseling work with grieving families. She'd lost her husband a few years ago, and though she rarely spoke about it, her grief was always just beneath the surface. Without giving myself time to second guess, I dialed. Mrs. Graves, it's Sarah Walker, from the Bright Futures Gala. I hope this isn't a bad time. We exchanged pleasantries before I gently asked about her recent donation to New Beginnings maternal care. There was a pause on the other end. I was promised, she said slowly, that the baby would be named after my husband, Edward, if it was a boy. Edwina, for a girl. It was supposed to be a memorial. Colette said it would be her way of honoring our shared losses, and she told me her husband, what was his name, Alaric, that he had agreed. 30 minutes later, I was still sitting in my car, stunned. Her words echoed in my ears. This wasn't just faking a pregnancy. This was leveraging trauma, exploiting mourning hearts, using grief as currency. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't protect her anymore. The post appeared on a local community forum 3 days later. I didn't write it, neither did Bennett, but someone had. Fraud alert. Local nonprofit director faking pregnancy to solicit donations. Within hours, it went viral. Screenshots spread across every platform. Local news picked it up by the afternoon. Colette's phone went to voicemail. Alaric deleted all his social media accounts. Bennett was called into the hospital administration office, asked to provide any insight as a medical professional. So was Dr. Harmon, the obstetrician from the shower. I didn't say anything specific, Bennett told me that evening as he collapsed on our couch, tie loosened, shoulders slumped, just confirmed I had medical concerns about her condition. I nodded, scrolling through the barrage of online comments. The reaction was brutal. People we had known for years, neighbors, former classmates, fellow volunteers, voiced their horror, disgust, and heartbreak. Some offered sympathy, speculating mental illness. Others called for criminal charges. The town was divided, but no one was quiet. "How did this get out?" Bennett asked. "You didn't tell anyone else, right?" "I spoke with Mrs. Graves," I admitted, "but not about the fraud, just the name. She was horrified. There's no way she would have posted it." "Then maybe it was someone else, someone at the shower, or Murad?" "Maybe. It didn't matter now, the damage was done." The letter arrived the next day, hand-delivered. The envelope was thick, ivory, sealed with a wax stamp I recognized from Colette's old stationery set. Inside, her handwriting was unmistakable. "Sarah, I know what you did. I trusted you with my truth, and you betrayed me, just like everyone else. Don't bother pretending otherwise. You've always been jealous of my life, my marriage, my success. You act supportive, but I've always known you were waiting for me to fall. Well, congratulations. You finally destroyed what I built. I hope you're happy. Colette." There was no apology, no accountability, just blame, a final twist of the knife. I crumpled the letter in my hands, but not before an old memory flashed in my mind. Junior year high school cafeteria, Colette collapsing after her boyfriend dumped her. The ambulance had come, teachers had panicked, she'd missed 3 days of school, basking in sympathy. Later she'd whispered to me, "I just wanted everyone to see how badly he hurt me." I'd excused it then, just like I'd excused so many other things. The flirtation with my boyfriend, the lies, the way plans always changed when something better came along. I'd forgiven her every time, drawn in by that disarming smile, the glittering charisma that made it easy to forget, easy to believe. But not. The sharp chime of the doorbell jolted me from the fog of my thoughts. When I opened the door, Sierra stood on the porch, her usual artistic flair replaced with simplicity. Jeans, a plain t-shirt, her curly hair pulled back. She looked worn down, as if the last few days had stripped something essential from her. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded and led her to the kitchen. The kettle was already warm from the tea I hadn't touched earlier, so I poured us both mugs of coffee instead. We sat at the table, steam curling between us like unspoken words. "I feel like such an idiot," she whispered after a long silence. I looked up. "I gave her $3,000, Sierra confessed, shame coloring her features. "For the nursery. She told me it was just until a big interior design commission came through. Said she had to pay the contractor up front to secure the slot." My breath caught. "Sierra." "I know," she interrupted, eyes welling with tears. "I know it was stupid, but she's always paid me back before, and she was so happy, so excited to get everything perfect for the baby. She even showed me mood boards." I reached across the table, touching her hand. "There is no baby," I said gently. She nodded slowly, lips trembling. "I figured. I didn't want to believe it." "She miscarried about a year ago," I added, "early. She never told anyone except Alaric and her doctor. I think that was real. Everything since? I don't know." Sierra wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her shirt. "That explains more than whatever she's been doing lately." "Did she ask anyone else for money?" I asked. "Maybe Opal," she replied. "They had lunch a few weeks ago, and afterward Colette was suddenly obsessed with getting her involved in a foundation. Said she had plans for a whole mental health arm of the organization." After Sierra left, I didn't waste time. I called Opal. She answered on the first ring, her voice already steady and analytical. The therapist tone I knew well. "I've been expecting your call," she said. "You're wondering if she asked me for money." "Did she?" "Outright. But she brought up her foundation a lot. talked about how they needed a mental health consultant, said I'd be perfect, kept hinting at compensation but never asked directly. I offered to volunteer my time. She seemed disappointed. You saw through it. Opal sighed. Professional hazard. I notice when someone's performing rather than being. There was a pause. In my professional opinion, she continued, Colette shows traits consistent with Munchausen syndrome. I blinked. That's when people fake illnesses for attention? Yes, but this is more nuanced. It's closer to Munchausen by proxy, except the proxy is her own identity, as a mother. She's created a version of herself centered entirely around this pregnancy, and from that identity, she's drawn sympathy, attention, and now financial gain. I pressed my hand to my forehead, overwhelmed. What happens to someone like that without help? The lies get bigger, the stakes get higher, and eventually it all collapses. Her voice softened. Has anyone heard from her? She sent me a letter, I said. Blamed me for everything. Classic deflection. She can't process her own guilt. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock loud in the quiet. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Gage, Colette's younger brother. Sarah, he said, his voice ragged. Have you heard from Colette? Have you? She called yesterday, crying. I couldn't make sense of half of it, but I knew something was wrong. I've known for a while, if I'm honest. But I didn't have proof, and Mom and Dad wouldn't listen. It's not your fault, Gage. Isn't it? She's my sister. I should have pushed harder. His voice cracked. The police are involved now. Fraud charges have been filed. My heart dropped. Already? Well, donors and Sarah, she's gone. Emptied her accounts this morning. No one can find her. I gripped the phone tighter. What about Alaric? He says she left him too. He's furious, not worried. That tells me everything I need to know about their marriage. After we hung up, I immediately called Bennett at the hospital. Colette's missing, I said without preamble. There was a pause. Missing how? He disappeared, took everything in her accounts. No one's heard from her since yesterday. Another silence. She might come to you. Why would she? She blames me for all of this. Because you're her anchor, her emotional constant. Even when she pushes you away, she's really testing the line to see if it'll hold. His words haunted me as the sky darkened and rain began to fall. By 9 p.m., the gentle tapping on the roof had turned into a steady downpour. Bennett was called into emergency surgery, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I tried to sleep. I paced. I watched the windows. And just when I had given up on calm, a faint knock echoed through the house. I froze. The knock came again, soft, hesitant, barely audible over the rain. I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. Colette stood on the porch, soaked to the bone. Her sundress clung to her thin frame, hair plastered to her face. No makeup, no jewelry, no illusion. Just Colette. A shadow of her former self. I opened the door. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, eyes empty. Then, without warning, her legs buckled. I caught her before she hit the floor, her body limp and trembling. She weighed almost nothing, her ribs sharp through the wet fabric of her dress. I half-carried her to the couch and wrapped her in the thickest blanket I could find. She didn't respond. I made tea, asked questions. She said nothing. Eventually I gave up. I sat beside her, watching the rain, listening to the wind. After what felt like hours, she whispered, "Tell me what to do, I'll do it." I looked at her, this ghost wearing my best friend's face, and felt nothing but exhaustion. When Bennett came home at dawn, he found us like that. Colette curled into herself on the couch, me in the armchair beside her, keeping watch over the wreckage of a life we used to share. The warrant came down early that morning, crisp and decisive. Bennett met me in the kitchen, his scrubs still damp from the rain, the tension in his shoulders unmistakable. "They've issued it," he said, sliding a mug of coffee toward me. "Fraud, multiple counts. The Graves Foundation is pressing charges." I turned slowly, eyes drifting to the living room where Colette lay curled beneath our throw blanket. Her chest rose and fell evenly, but her face was pale, shadowed. "She has nothing left," I murmured. "No money, no home, no reputation." Bennett was quiet for a beat. Then, gently but firmly, he said, "That's not our problem anymore." The words were hard but not cruel, just facts, the kind that come after all the emotion is wrung out. Sarah, she manipulated grieving families, took advantage of people in pain, lied and stole under the guise of charity. I know, I admitted, my voice raw. She needs help, serious professional help. And consequences, Bennett added. She can't stay here. I want her gone by noon. There was no anger in his voice, just resolve, and I couldn't argue. Letting her stay would tether us to whatever came next. After he left for his shift, I made toast and brewed fresh coffee. I placed the plate and mug on the table in front of Colette as she stirred awake. Bennett wants you out by noon, I said, offering no cushioning. She sat up slowly, hair matted to one side, her eyes hollow. She stared at the plate, then picked at the toast, not really eating. Where am I supposed to go? You could turn yourself in, I said. Start taking responsibility. She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. They'll lock me up. Maybe, maybe not. But if you keep running, it'll be worse. A pause. Then, almost as if the thought had just occurred to her, she added, a documentary producer called yesterday, said there's a story here about deception and mental illness in the digital age, wants to interview us both, offered money. Good money. My stomach turned. You can't be serious. Why not? At least then I control the narrative. Even now, in the midst of everything, she was thinking about the spotlight, the camera, the audience. This isn't a PR disaster, Colette, I snapped. This is real life. You lied to everyone. You exploited pain and grief, not just for the foundation, for yourself, for clout. She stiffened. The money went to the nonprofit, which you controlled, which gave you access to power, prestige, credibility. You wrapped yourself in a cause and turned it into a costume. Her defenses cracked for a moment. She looked smaller, the years falling off her face. What do you want from me, Sarah? A confession? A full-body mea culpa? Will that make you feel better for turning your back on me when I needed you most? This isn't about me. It's always been about you. She stood, hands clenched. Perfect Sarah, perfect marriage, perfect career, never wrong, never uncertain. Do you know what it's like to live in your shadow? I let the accusation land, then said, quietly, I've made plenty of mistakes, including letting this friendship twist into something toxic. You call it loyalty, but what you've needed, what you've demanded, isn't friendship, it's fealty. She recoiled, the words striking deeper than I expected. Her next words were a whisper. I think there's something wrong with me. I don't know where the lies end anymore. I don't know what's true unless someone else tells me. I softened. Then you need help, Colette. Real help. Tears welled in her eyes. I just wanted to be special again. Before I could answer, there was a knock. We both froze. I walked to the window. A police cruiser idled in the driveway. Colette bolted for the back door. I caught her wrist. Don't. If you run, it'll be worse. Let me go, she begged, her body trembling. Please, Sarah, I can't go to jail. I looked at the woman I had once called sister and saw not a monster, but a void. A person who had built herself on shifting sand and now stood at the edge of collapse. I'll speak for you, I said. I'll tell them you came willingly, that you're cooperative. It might help. She collapsed against the wall, defeated. You think I'm evil, don't you? No, I said. I think you're lost, and I don't know how to find you anymore. The next few hours passed in blurs as statements given, handcuffs clicked, Colette staring blankly from the back of the cruiser. I gave a carefully curated account, enough truth to be useful, enough mercy to offer her some future. In court, Colette accepted a plea deal, probation, restitution, community service, and mandatory psychiatric treatment. The nonprofit was dissolved, its remaining funds distributed to real maternal health charities. I testified, threading the needle between honesty and protection. I spoke of the miscarriage, the unraveling grief, the genuine help her foundation had given despite its fraudulent core. I did not mention the names she'd manipulated, or the journal that hinted this had been calculated from the start. Some called it perjury by omission. I called it the last kindness I could give. 6 months after that fateful baby shower, a letter arrived from the psychiatric hospital. Sarah, they say this letter is part of my recovery, that writing it means I've started accepting responsibility. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know if this is remorse or just another version of performance. I've spent so long playing the part I forgot how to just be. But I do know this. You saved me, not by protecting me, not by lying for me, but by finally stopping me. You didn't make excuses, you didn't look away, you told the truth, even when it cost you. And that's the kind of friend I should have been. Colette. I folded the letter, hands trembling, set it in a drawer I wasn't sure I'd ever open again. Some friendships are houses built on sand. No matter how carefully constructed, they were never meant to last. But the sea of memory remains, lapping always at the edges. The way a sister would, with hard truth and harder love. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I needed you to know that in the ruins of everything I shattered, I finally understand the difference between being seen and being truly known. Colette. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in a memory box tucked deep in our closet, nestled beside old childhood photos, faded friendship bracelets, and a strip of pale blue shawl, the one I pretended to leave behind just to get inside her house. Then I drove to the baby shower venue. The barn, once draped in lavender and joy, now stood hollow under the soft gold of autumn light. I sat on its front steps, watching leaves fall in slow spirals, thinking of the truths we don't want to see in those we love, the ways we convince ourselves that everything's fine, that what they're telling us is real because it's easier than confronting what might lie beneath. Colette taught me something, though not in the way she intended. Some lies are told out of love, others are crafted for attention, for admiration, for the illusion of something more. And sometimes, the most painful deceptions come from the people we once believed would never lie to us at all. Have you ever ignored red flags in a friendship, choosing comfort over truth? If this story hit home, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real stories about the hidden shadows behind our most familiar